Like the view? So today I wanted to make this video about a culture war and describe what it is, what levels of culture war we have. So let me start first of all by defining what a culture war is. A culture war is when factions of a society, whether it be two factions or more, disagree, have differing views, opinions and philosophies. And this is when a culture war starts. So it's usually based on age groups. So we know for a long time that the new generation, they like change, they want change. But the older generation don't. They don't want to change. They're kind of stuck in their ways, if you like, but they're used to the way it is, and they don't like to change. Whether it be in any aspect of their life, whether it's a new job, older people don't really like to get a new job because they've got to learn everything again, and they don't really want to do that. And older people, I'm saying older people, I'm talking about from sort of 30, 35 and up. That's not really older people, but it's the sort of the non-young generation. Let's put it that way. So, these non-young generation, they're not very good at accepting new things, like especially technology. You've probably noticed. New apps and new software and things like this. The older generation, or the non-young generation, they're not very quick on the uptake of these new trends and fashions and things like that. But that's been like that since the dawn of humanity. That's never going to change. But when we come to a culture war, I'm going to give you an example of a culture war that is happening in Thailand at the moment. And it's a very mundane, ordinary thing. It's the new generation wanting to have their say, wanting to make changes, and wanting a public place to voice their opinion. And it's very normal. This happens pretty much everywhere all the time. The new generation come up and they want to change things. And there's opposition from everybody who's not young. They don't want change. And this is a very ordinary culture war. And then we get to the other extreme, like the Cultural Revolution in China. You're probably going to say, well, hang on, that's a cultural revolution. It's not a culture war. Well, I beg to differ on that point, because the word culture war is based on a German word. It's a borrowed term from a German word. And now I'm going to go from memory here. Forgive me if I get this wrong. It's Kulturkampf. Kulturkampf is the German word. And this was I think it was the 1870s, when the German Empire were arguing with the Catholic Church. And so I think it was a New York reporter. He got hold of this term and called it a culture war. He translated it to culture war, but in actual fact, the direct translation from German means cultural struggle. So culture war is a borrowed term, and cultural revolution is also a cultural struggle. And I guess the main difference being between culture war and cultural revolution is the government initiates the revolution. In the case of China, that was the government initiating the change. But it's not always like that. The Arab Spring revolution, that was a cultural revolution in the Arab countries. That wasn't started by the government, tried to quash that. They didn't want it to happen, but it did. Because that was society voicing their opinion. It wasn't just the young at that stage, it was pretty much every level of society voicing their opinion and wanting to change. I believe that the two terms, cultural revolution and culture war, are pretty much the same thing. So yeah, we've talked about already the sort of base level of a culture war, which was the Thai example. And when we look at developed countries, there's two in particular which are going through a bit of a rough stage at the moment. It is really a culture war. That's the UK and the US. The US, this BLM, this movement, it's been going for a long time, really. I mean, since the abolishment of slavery. I mean, even during the abolishment of slavery, that was a culture war even back then. And it's an ongoing one. It hasn't stopped, and it's still going on. And it's got to a new level right now with this culture war, to the point where there is civil unrest in the name of this culture war. And it's progressively getting worse. Now, when we mix two types of culture with culture war, so the two main groups of culture are collectivist culture and individualist culture. Now, collectivist culture far outnumbers the individualist culture. It's only developed countries, mostly, who are individualist. So these two types of culture, the effects of a culture war are very different on both of these types of cultures. So if we look first at collectivist cultures, it's all about the group. It's not about the individual. If the majority come out and say, no, this is how it's going to be, then people generally follow, because the majority of the group said so, and everybody follows. But when it's an individualist culture, everybody's out for themselves, and it's their opinion that matters, not anyone else's. So this is a very difficult place to start with a culture war, because the individual in society, each individual in society, has different views and opinions, and they don't necessarily have to accept the views and opinions of others, because they're individual. So when that's part of the equation, finding a solution to a culture war is very tough, it's very difficult. And this, I think, is where the US and the UK are at right now. In the UK's case, they've had an influx of immigrants coming in, and it's changed the landscape of the country to the extent where entire cities are majority of immigrants. They're not what we would call British people anymore, I'm going to say native British people. They're immigrants, and they're changing this, that and the other, and they've got their members of local administration, and even in the national government level now, they're having members elected into which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. That's good that the different ethnic groups are getting a voice for themselves. But the struggle is when individualist culture is stretched to the max, where, as I've already mentioned, the older generation, they don't want change. And when they see their cityscape is changing, their traditional shops have gone, and they're being replaced by shops catering to different ethnicities. That's all a big change to them, and they don't take it too well. The younger generation, they're okay with it. They kind of feel sorry for these immigrants as well, and they're very adaptable. They're very pliable. We'll use that term. But the older generation, they're not. So if in Thai, they have a great expression. They say, young wood and old wood. So young wood is very bendable. So if you get a young piece of bamboo, you can sort of bend it around like this, and it doesn't snap. But when you have an old piece of bamboo, then you try and bend that, and it just snaps. It's not pliable at all. And this is very similar to the young generation and then the non-young generation. They're not pliable. The Cultural Revolution in China, I haven't actually explained that bit. So the Cultural Revolution in China, that was pretty extreme. Chairman Mao, he wanted to change the mindset of the Chinese people. to have only the communist ideology. That's it. So he went to a bit of an extreme to make that happen. He ordered history to be erased. So, China's rich and very long history was basically erased by the Cultural Revolution. So they had to burn all books and destroy temples, destroy religious symbols, and everything that was about the old China. They didn't want anything to exist or anything to be left. Now, obviously, as I've said, now this is the third time. The young generation, they're very pliable, but the older generation, they're not. So the older generation didn't take kindly to that at all. And this is an example of the sort of thing that went on in the Cultural Revolution. So maybe there was some old Chinese lady who had a book, an old book that she loved, and it was possibly the teachings of Confucius or something along those lines, and she wanted to hang on to it. Even though the rule was that all books that were about history of China had to be destroyed, burnt. And they actually publicly burnt these books. They had big piles and burnt them all. And this old lady thought, no, I want to hang on to this book, so she hid it. And maybe one of the young generation, because they were really into this, they was like, yeah, this is our generation's direction, so they really got into it. And when somebody discovered this book this old lady had hidden, they would go to the authorities and grass her up, and she would get dragged out in public. She would be put on a stage and she would have a sign hung around her neck stating her crime. And the people would throw rotten eggs and rotten vegetables and stuff at her, and it was really sad, and then there would be a verdict on the punishment that she should receive, which could be anything, from being beaten by the public, or stoned, or hung, or shot. All of these were viable punishments for crimes committed against the Cultural Revolution, or against the CPC at the time. So yeah, this was tough. This was just awful. And researchers, there's varying opinions by the researchers on the number of lives lost during the Cultural Revolution in China. Some estimate around 30 million. And another Chinese researcher, he estimates up to 70 million. They had labor camps and all sorts of stuff going on, for people who had committed crimes against the Cultural Revolution, and they were sent off to labor camps or just publicly executed. It was shockingly bad. So again, my equation is that a culture war is the same as a cultural revolution. So culture wars are not to be sniffed at. They're pretty serious things. We have to be very careful. And it looks to me, as I mentioned, that the US and the UK, they have their own culture wars going on right now. I'm sure there are far more countries than that, but these are the two that I've been kind of following recently, and sort of just getting an insight into what's going on in their societies right now. So yeah. Anyway, stay tuned. I'll be talking in more detail. We'll be digging deeper into wokeism and cancel culture and all of these, and the part they play in culture wars. Okay, but that's coming up in the next video. Okay, so thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and like and comment. Please comment. Yeah, everybody, you're all entitled to your opinions as well. Okay, thanks very much. Bye.